Hi, I'm Mike Vardy, and I'm about to revisit a productive conversation with Josh Kaufman. Welcome again to A Productive Conversation. I'm Mike Vardy, and we're going back into the archives, back to December of 2018, as I have a conversation with Josh Kaufman. We talk about the book, How to Fight a Hydra. Face your fears, pursue your ambitions, and become the hero you're destined to be. And I wanted to bring this episode back to the fore because I had a chance to see Josh again in June of this year, 2022, in Portland while we were both attending the World Domination Summit. We had a chance to share a meal together along with some other people talking about the book industry. We talked a little bit about his book. And again, I loved this book. I love what Josh does, and I wanted to share this conversation with you because seeing him in June reminded me of how much I enjoy chatting with Josh. And I know you're going to enjoy this conversation. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this productive conversation with Josh Kaufman. I'd like to welcome Josh Kaufman to the Productivityist podcast. Josh, thanks for joining me.
Mike, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
You know, I don't know why I haven't had you on the show before. We've crossed paths many times. My only reason for maybe not having you on the show up until this point is because I still have as I pull away, a fairly fresh copy of the Personal MBA, Master the Art of Business, which I should have read 7 years ago, but I'm just going through as I'm learning now. It's one of those things where there's so many great people that you can talk to. And because we've crossed paths on several occasions, it's almost like, oh yeah, right, I haven't had you on the show yet. So it's good to have you here.
It's great to be here, and it's never too late.
No, it's never too late. I want to talk about your book because, we've talked, you've got the Personal MBA and you got the first 20 hours, right? Like that. And then you've got How to Fight a Hydra. Now, which of those things is not like the other?
This one was a bit of a departure for me. A fun one.
But not terribly so, because I think that I'm a big fan of the parable and the fable kind of stories, because I think that there's a lot that you can glean from going into this book. When I read it, and I actually listened to the audio version of it, I had a sense of what I went in with that mindset, right? Which I think is helpful if you're kind of primed for it. I mean, you've got the alchemist, you've got the go-giver, you've got you can even go so far as to say the Legend of Bagger Vance to a certain degree, right? By Stephen Pressfield. What led you down this path of saying, I'm going to present life lessons and business lessons inside of this fable based on an adventurer's pursuit to fight a Hydra?
So the long story of Hydra is very relevant to the topic of this podcast. Hydra actually started as a productivity book. And one of the things that I noticed, I worked on that book for about a year. And the focus was very much, or I was attempting to do the same thing that I did in Personal MBA. Like, let's take all of the most important things to know about business, boil them down, distill them to the essence, put them in a single book that someone who's new to this can just pick up and learn all the most important things quickly. So that was the intent. And I worked on that book for a year, and the manuscript just wasn't working, and I couldn't figure out why. And so I had a lot of conversations with the various folks who read early copies of my work and edit. And I started really trying to get to the core of, why do people follow productivity materials in the first place? Like, why is this a big thing that people are interested in and need more of in their life? And I was thinking back to the conversations that I had with readers of both Personal MBA and First 20 Hours. And so for Personal MBA readers, a lot of those conversations were along the lines of, I have a new business idea, but I'm not sure if it's going to work. Can you please tell me it's going to work, that this is going to be a good use of my time? And the same thing with First 20 Hours is, I want to learn something new, but I'm not sure if I can. I'm not sure if I have what it takes to get as good as I want to be. Can you please provide me some assurance that spending my time in this way is going to be beneficial for me, and that I'm going to be able to get what I want from it? And so there's this universal undercurrent of uncertainty and anxiety and fear of the unknown. Like, I'm afraid I'm going to invest a lot of myself into something that is not going to work, and I'm going to feel really bad about that. And so I really started exploring these topics as a thing in and of itself. Like, if you're trying to achieve something big in your life, no matter what that is, you're always going to have to deal with that uncertainty and anxiety and fear of the unknown. And so it's beneficial for us to both look at that squarely, to understand what the challenge is and how to face it, and then learn some ways to approach those universal challenges in a way that helps us, step up and actually go after the things that we want in our life.
So, and what you're saying is definitely something that I run across all the time. People are, both the fear of what if I don't do this, but the fear of what if I do, right? So if someone reads a productivity, and you're right, there's a slew of productivity books. I mean, the term productivity porn is pervasive on the internet, right? Like, there are so many different ways that you could tackle tasks, take on projects, and, goal set. And I mean, if you spend we both spent lots of time in those spaces looking at every nook and cranny of it on the internet. When we started this conversation just before we started recording, the term productivity expert came up, and it's interesting because I've always thought of you as more of a business entrepreneurial expert, or a person that knows a lot about that stuff. But productivity wasn't a thing that I necessarily said, Josh Kaufman, he's a productivity guy, you should go check out his work.
Sure.
What was the first 20 hours kind of like that first really real foray into it, like into a deeper dive? Because personal MBA obviously is a broad, like you said, it covers a lot of stuff. It's broad strokes. And the first 20 hours dives in a little bit deeper. This Hydra seems to dive in a completely different way in terms of, making sure you're understanding the moves that you're making and what you're going to face along the way. Is that how your journey to being a productivity expert has kind of come? And was that your intent to say, hey, you know what, now I've gone down this path a little bit more than, say, the path that maybe the personal MBA was initially setting you off on in the first place?
Yeah, I think the overarching theme of my work in general is probably best described as practical wisdom. Like, how do we understand what we're trying to do, why we're trying to do it, what we want out of it, and really think about the approaches that we're taking to the work, and figuring out if the approach we're currently considering or taking is actually the best way to get what we want. And so there are undercurrents of those things in personal MBA. If you want to start a business, here's how you can understand in a much more clear and sophisticated way what a business is, how it works, what you need to do, what you don't need to do, or distractions from what you want. And by improving your understanding of this thing you're trying to do, you can make much better decisions and get much better results. I think that's a productivity topic. Same thing with first 20 hours. What is the skill that you're trying to pick up? What do you want to be able to do that you're not able to do right now? What does that look like when you've reached that skill level? And then how can you go about the process of learning and research and practice and figuring out how to get the help you need? How can you do that in a way that gets you from knowing absolutely nothing to being really, really good in as little time as possible? I mean, that's a productivity topic. So I think of Hydra in the same terms, only it really gets more to the root of, whatever it is you want to do. Like, what do you value? What are you pursuing? Why are you pursuing that? And why is it important to you? And then all of the barriers that are in your way, maybe it's you have to learn how to do something new. Maybe you have to figure out some very complex and scary problem that you're currently facing. And maybe some of the things that you have to confront are not out there in the world, but are inside your mind. And the hesitation and the fear and the emotional difficulty of going after something big and potentially doing that for a very long time. So I think of all of those ideas in a very broad sense as productivity topics.
So let's get back to the creation of the new book, of the book, How to Fight a Hydra. So So, you're working on this book for a year. It's not the book. When was there a specific moment where you either maybe a piece of literature inspired you, or maybe some piece that kind of hit you out of nowhere that said, this book needs to be rooted more in, let's say, metaphor, so that it has maybe that timelessness to it that Ryan Holiday talks about, right? Where you can, because I can picture myself picking this book up again and again. I've read like The Go-Giver several times. I can actually remember listening to The Go-Giver, and I think I've talked about this once before. And I was doing the dishes, and there was a part where I could see the end coming, and I started to well up a bit because it was one of those moments where I'm like, oh, this is what this. And reading The Alchemist, again, same thing. Didn't quite well up, but reading it, there's value there because there's pieces that you either didn't pick up when you first read it, or that you didn't need at that time, where you're not necessarily, at least in my mind, not necessarily going to get that from a straightforward productivity book or business book or whatever. So what was that moment where you said, this book doesn't need to be this. Instead, I'm going to go down this path and see where this is what this book needs to be.
Yeah, there were three primary influences, and I'll get to that in a minute. I think the big thing that I started thinking of when it's like, okay, I'm going to write about uncertainty and risk and fear of the unknown, is that, my classic approach to writing is research-based nonfiction. And turns out that writing research-based nonfiction about uncertainty and risk and fear of the unknown is a great way to write a book that nobody wants to read because it's super uncomfortable. So part of the difficulty of this topic is, it's emotionally loaded. Like, we all have things that we want to do that we're scared to pursue or concerned about our ability to be able to pull it off. And so I really started thinking early on, if I'm going to do this, I have to do it in a completely different way, because the way I'm used to approaching these topics just isn't going to work for this one. And so the first primary influence was The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield. And wonderful book, just like you mentioned. It's a book I've read 5 or 6 times. And, one of the things that Stephen does extremely well is take this bundle of doubt and emotions and blocks and hesitations, and he essentially makes it an entity that is outside of yourself. He calls it the resistance. And I think he describes it as a malevolent force of nature that is trying desperately to get you to not do the thing that you want to do. And so I thought that was a really interesting approach to being able to talk about this cluster of issues as a thing, an entity, something that you need to address. And I'd read a couple years prior, there's a great book called Metaphors We Live By I think it's Mark Lakoff and Mark Johnson. And the upshot of that book is that the metaphors that we use to think about the world around us substantially influence how we think about the world, how we approach the world, and how we act on a day-to-day, minute-to-minute basis. And the best, most memorable example from the book is they say, if you think of argument as war, you're going to approach a conversation as in a very substantial way. If you think of argument as a dance, or a conversation as a dance, that interaction is going to look very different. And the only difference is mental. It's how you are thinking of, how you are conceptualizing this thing that you are engaged in. And so Hydra came about by essentially combining those two ideas. It's, what if this, the crazy, big, ambitious, scary projects that we're trying to pursue, like, what if we treat that as some sort of entity that's easy to visualize, something that is complex by nature and any right-minded person would be very hesitant to approach in the first place. Mm-hmm. And so I am a big fan of both mythology and fantasy. So I have an active Dungeons & Dragons group that we've been going for about a year now. So this is the storyness is something that I really enjoy and is a big part of my life. And so the image of a Hydra just popped immediately to mind as something, a big, scary, complex monster that if you're going to defeat it, you're going to have to approach it in a very specific way.
And I'm actually doing Dungeons and Dragons right now.
Fantastic.
A bunch of us get together. So I'm a rogue. I think I'm a thief now. I'm moved up to level 4. We've only started but it's one of those things where we found a way to get together and yeah, there's you can immerse yourself. And I remember playing Bard's Tale.
Oh, so fun.
99 berserkers, 99. And that was a great example of and for anyone who's played that game, I'll link to it. So, because I think you can get it on iOS now, but, I think anyway, you can play it. There was a point where there was this group of berserkers that you had to face before you could get to the final boss. But as you're going into the catacombs or something like that. And I would constantly try to beat those guys, but you try different tactics to try to do it. And eventually you just had to keep making yourself more powerful, as well as try different strategies to do it. And I think that when you, in this book, you've got the same, that comes up again and again, it's not like you can slay the Hydra in one fell swoop, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And you may need to improve substantially in a great many areas to be able to do the thing that you want to do. And that's just, it's part of the expected difficulty of the adventure that you've chose to go on. And I think reframing whatever this big ambitious project that you're trying to pursue as an adventure, as something that requires some exploration, that requires training, that requires experimentation, trying different things and seeing what works. I think approaching these big life goal things as an adventure is a very useful way of framing and setting your own expectations on what the entire journey is going to look like.
I think that metaphor also does something that can really help people attack things like this, is it humanizes them, right?
Totally.
It makes it I think one of the things that happens with a lot of things when we look at them, we tend to overcomplicate them. We tend to, we get in our own way. But when you add story, when you add this idea of, and of course the hero's journey comes up in this as well. The funny thing is as the book progresses, and if you when you get the book, and you should, and the audiobook is great. Josh reads it. There's a few accents that you pull off in there.
Thanks.
Different voices. And it reminded me a bit of, and again, there's another great book. We're seeing more of these Rules for a Night by Ethan Hawke, right?
Absolutely.
I think in a world that is so, moves at such a great pace and is very rooted in, these things that are so tangible and yet can become so overwhelming. I think books like this and stories like this that kind of, as I'm listening to it and as I'm reading it, go, oh, I see what you did there. Oh, I see what you did there. And by the way, for me, the Hydra wasn't necessarily a project. It was my entire business. That's the way I look at it first, right? So that's the other thing about metaphor. You get to personalize it, right?
That is one of the most fascinating things about this entire project. People read themselves into the story. And, I've had responses from some of the early readers of the book that are all across the spectrum in ways that I had no idea that it would apply to. So I had a friend who read the book, and he said, this book is about the process of overcoming addiction. It's like, wow. I didn't intend it for it to be that, but if that is something that you can read and get value out of it, that's great. My 90-year-old grandmother read the book, and she's like, this book is about getting old. Like, I didn't intend that either, but that's really cool. And that's the neat thing about metaphor and the neat thing about fiction, particularly, this type of fiction that has research and conceptual backing, is that it can apply to all sorts of different circumstances that I didn't anticipate. But if people find value there, I'm absolutely all for it.
My son was hearing me listen to the book last night because I had it on my speaker in my bedroom, and he heard the term Hydra. And he's 8, so he has a sense of this stuff now. He plays Lego video games. He's got Minecraft on the brain. In fact, it's one of the reasons why time crafting kind of came to be, the methodology I teach it. kind of when you're again, that abstract comes in where one of the things you're supposed to talk to your kids about is not how was your day at school, because you're going to get fine, or it was okay, or whatever. So you ask them about things that are going to engage them. And I asked him, well, what's Minecraft? Like, could you explain Minecraft to me? And he said, it's about taking different parts, and I'm simplifying it, but taking different like raw elements and combining them together to make something amazing, like something cool. And I'm like, oh, that's, I thought about it from my own vantage point. And I thought, well, that's, you take the calendar, you take the to-do list, you take all these things, you put them together, you have a wonderful life. That's time. Oh, time crafting. And all of a sudden, boom, that was it. How now that you've got this book out there, are you still, and obviously when you're so immersed in things, you were able to piece these abstract thoughts together, because this book would not exist if you, in its form, if you weren't able to do that, because there are lesson upon lesson upon lesson. And it's not like it's overbearing. It's not like you're getting hit jab, 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 jab. They land. And like I said before, you can come back to the book later and go, oh, I missed that before. Or, oh, this means something different to me now. Mm-hmm. Are you going to be exploring stuff like this in your writing down the road? I mean, because you've got this is like we said, a different kind of book for you. Or was this an experiment that you kind of want to leave and see how it plays? And then maybe like as a writer, you're going to look at other things, or how does this play into the whole body of work that you're putting together?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. The very last thing that I anticipated doing this year when I started the project was writing a fictional book. Mm-hmm. And so it's very much an experiment. It's an experiment that I really enjoyed. I think I enjoyed writing this book far more than either Personal MBA or First 20 Hours. I have often envied fiction writers for, if they get stuck or don't know what to do next, they can just make something up. And so it was really nice to be able to do that. Or spend a lot of mental bandwidth trying to construct a situation that would illustrate the things that I wanted to illustrate. And, it's a very different way of learning material. So, a lot of nonfiction is recommendation based. Here's what the research says. This is what you should do. This is how you should go about doing it. This way is the best way.
And anecdotal stuff.
Yeah.
People fill in. I mean, you and I both know that there are books out there, really great books and books that are not so good, that you can go, okay, we don't need as much anecdotal stuff in there. And a lot of it's there just to fill, in some cases, to either support what's already been said, or frankly, to fill pages.
Totally.
Right?
Yeah.
So you get away from that when you write fiction.
Yeah. And I think it's a fundamentally different way of learning when the process by which you're learning useful things is you're watching someone in a difficult situation, and you're seeing them deal with that difficult situation in a very skillful way. There's a lot of, it's more broadly applicable, like we were talking about earlier, but even just, watching somebody do something is a different way of learning. And so that's the part of Hydra that I really like as a way of illustrating these, sometimes very old philosophical concepts, and sometimes these very new, very modern, here's how you approach a complex situation concepts. So yeah, I don't know if I am going to plan to write more like this in the future. This is probably the most woo-woo belief that I have in my brain. I think it's important when you're writing a book to try to listen or intuit what the book wants to be. And I don't know if that makes sense, but
no, as a writer, it makes sense.
Yeah,
it makes sense to me, but again, audience, maybe not so much, but to me. So go ahead and dive in a bit deeper.
Yeah. So a good example is Personal MBA, where I did 10-fold substantially different drafts of that book. And it wasn't until that I hit the structure that ended up being the final. It's like, yes, this is what this work needs to be to do what I want it to do. The same thing happened with First 20 Hours, and Hydra was very much this. And so one of the big both influences and models for the book is Meditations by Marcus Aurelius.
Yeah,
and it's great.
Looking at that book across from from my viewpoint right now, I can see it on my bookshelf. It stands out amongst a bunch of other ones.
Such a great book. I love it, and I love it in terms of it's very applicable to the themes in Hydra, because here's the most powerful person in the world. who is dealing with the same stuff that we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. Like if there's ever proof that this stuff is never going to go away, you're always going to have to deal with it. Reading that book is a really great reminder of that. But the form of meditations, for listeners who aren't familiar, it's essentially Marcus Aurelius was the emperor of Rome, and he was keeping a journal, and he was just writing notes to himself. And so there's a great tradition in fiction and literature of what are called epistolary novels. So the story takes place with people writing letters back and forth. So Bram Stoker's Dracula is a really great example of that. So in the nonfiction world, Meditations is essentially self-epistolary. It's Marcus Aurelius writing notes to himself about what he's learning, what he's struggling with, what he wants to do, what he wants to focus on. And so as a narrative device, that actually worked really well for Hydra because, the risk of doing fiction, particularly fiction with a research base, is you can kind of get too into the fiction bit, too much description, too many characters, too much dialogue, and that can really detract from the reader taking away the lessons that you hope that they'll take away. And so once I found that that self-epistolary narrative device, so an adventurer writing notes to themselves as they're in the process of doing something hard and describing what they're going through, the whole book just came together in a really beautiful way.
As you're mentioning this, one of the things I started thinking about is I've been reading Jason Kocke's blog for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
The two blogs I read, well, three, but two that I really read, Austin Kleon, who I just, I love his stuff,
yeah,
as well as Jason Kocke and Seth Godin as well. Those ones, I mean, they're daily pretty much. So, but Jason recently, as we're recording this, has been sharing children's editions of well-known books. So, for example, Stephen Johnson's How We Got to Now, but written for children. And as you were mentioning, like the less descriptive stuff and kind of getting to the, almost not getting to the point, I'll use that as the phrasing just to, simplify it. But this idea that, we tend to get caught up in the flowery elements rather than the, hey, here's the meat of the issue. Here's the meat of the story. I'm looking at, I think about that. And then I'm looking at my bookshelf right now and I'm seeing books like, again, The Obstacle is the Way. I look at Ignore Everybody. I look at Derek Sivers' Anything You Want. Again, Pressfield's War of Art. Some of the best books that I've read that are helping me not just in work but in life are short, lesson based. I mean, yes, I have some Robert Greene stuff. I have the Organized Mind. I do have bigger books, but those books are ones that I can't do in one sitting, number one, but also because they're so meaty and heavy that it's harder for me to kind of grab onto them or gravitate them as much as these other books. And I think I would imagine that's what's going to happen with Hydra. I mean, I can already think about, number one, my son will probably want to hear it and listen to it. Because I said, hey, do you want me to play it for you one night before you're going to bed? And he goes, yeah. And the great thing about it is that those lessons will seep in ways that they won't seep in for me because he's 8 and I'm 44.
Yeah.
Right?
Totally.
So I think that there's some value in those stories that are short, they can be metaphorical, but the idea is instead of trying to be more than what it needs to be, just like you said, the book what it wants to be, let that book be that, and maybe don't get so obsessed with, I've got to get 300 pages, it's got to be 50,000 words, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I'm so glad to hear that. And that it's kind of echoed by a lot of the things that I've heard from the first readers of the book is I think that there's people attached an enormous amount of guilt to starting a book and not being able to finish it. Mm-hmm. And the length of a book is a direct influence in that, so people have less discretionary time. And, I think reading books is one of the highest value activities that you can have in your day. And so, I've been trying to figure out my approach to the work is always, let's take an enormous amount of information figure out the absolute most important things that make the biggest difference. And let's just talk about that stuff. And so that's one of the things that I think is going to directly carry over into future work is very concise, short, universal descriptions of important things. I mean, that's a theme that I definitely want to continue through my next several books.
Well, I'm looking forward to the Choose Your Own Adventure book that you're going to write.
Thanks.
The personal MBA, the series of, will he be an accountant or will he be a entrepreneur? Let's see which would. I remember. What was the other book? Remember the ones that were, they had green spines and where they fight for fantasy or where you had to roll dice. Do you remember those books?
Oh, no, I just talked to a friend who is doing one of those right now, and they're still being printed.
Yeah,
I don't remember the name of the series. It's so fun, so much fun.
Yeah, but they were like green spot. Yeah, I remember because you had to have dice. Like it was like a step up of Choose Your Own Adventure. I remember, and actually one of the things that I've done with and to show that I've been a writer for a really long time, I have from when I was in grade 7, a book that was inspired largely by Douglas Adams's work. It was called Tiny Adventures at the Local Malt Shop, and it's a novella. It's a really short, and it's written by someone in grade 7. So keep that in mind. With a lot of humor trying to come in from places really inspired by Douglas Adams. But one of the books I wrote really early on was a Choose Your Own Adventure book called The Last Delta or the Delta. And I have it. I still have it. I illustrated it. It's in a duotang, and it would have been from like the 80s. And I shared it with my son, and he read it, and it was like, funny story is that the villain in it, very Darth Maul, or very Kylo Ren mask thing going on. So, but I think that for anyone that is trying to get a message out, and it's not landing, or it seems complicated. I think even the front 9 to a degree, when I wrote the front 9, I used golf as a metaphor. Shouldn't have, I don't think, because I don't golf. But nonetheless, there was trying to teach lesson through metaphor. You've done it really, really well with this book. And I have to commend you for it. So where can people get the book right now so that they can, just dive into it and take the lessons that you're trying to teach in it?
Yeah, so the best place to find information on the book is the website, howtofightahydra.com. And there are links to the print ebook and audio editions all over the world. And so no matter where you are, it should be available. And then if you want more information on my work in general, the best place to go is joshkaufman.net.
Thanks for joining me today, Josh.
Mike, it's an absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
There you have it. I can't wait to talk to Josh again on a future episode of the podcast, or just to get together and have another meal with him. It was a great conversation that we had in June, and this was another example of just having great conversations be revisited from the archives. We do one of these per month here on A Productive Conversation, and this is another example of a great one. You can check out all of the show notes revolving around this episode at productivityist.com/podcast 446. If you want to subscribe to the show, that way you don't miss a single episode of what's to come, vault episodes and fresh, shiny new ones. Just subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening to podcasts right now. Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Overcast, wherever that's happening for you. And if you want to support the show in a completely different way, maybe get something that can help you beyond these conversations, head to our sponsors page. That way you can check out the sponsors that were mentioned on this episode and others that are there as well. Productivityist.com/podcast sponsors. Thanks again for joining me on this episode of A Productive Conversation. Until next time, I'm Mike Vardy, the host of A Productive Conversation, reminding you to stop doing productive and start being productive. See you later.